In 1791, an Italian scientist named Luigi Galvani touched a small iron nail to a dead frog's leg, and the leg kicked. Hard. The room fell silent. His assistants stepped back. Nobody in that room understood what they had just witnessed, but Galvani wrote 3 words in his notebook that night that would change the course of science forever. Electricity of life. He didn't know he had just handed humanity the key to understanding biological electricity, the same invisible force that fires every nerve in your body, drives every heartbeat, and as it turns out, governs the activity of billions of microorganisms living right now, at this exact moment, underneath your garden soil. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. That same principle, 2 different metals, moisture, a tiny electrical current, can be replicated in your backyard for under $2. A scrap of copper pipe, a strip of zinc flashing, both available at any junkyard or hardware store for pocket change. You push them into the ground near your plants, and something begins to happen beneath the surface that no fertilizer bag, no soil amendment product, no $49.99 bottle of microbial activator can fully replicate. The global fertilizer industry is worth over $200 billion in 2024. $200 billion. And somewhere inside that number is the reason you have never heard of this before. This is not a gardening hack. This is a 230-year-old secret that was buried, deliberately. And today we are digging it back up. Let's talk about the villain in this story, because every buried secret has one. In 1909, a German chemist named Fritz Haber stood in a laboratory in Karlsruhe and did something that would feed half the world and poison the other half simultaneously. He took nitrogen from the air, the same nitrogen that makes up 78% of every breath you take, and forced it into a chemical reaction that produced ammonia, synthetic ammonia, the foundation of every nitrogen fertilizer on the market today. The world called it a miracle. Haber won the Nobel Prize in 1918, and within decades, the Haber-Bosch process had been scaled into an industrial machine so vast, so deeply embedded into global agriculture, that today an estimated 50% of the nitrogen atoms inside your body came from a factory, not from the earth. But here is what the history books leave out. When World War II ended in 1945, the Allied forces faced a logistical crisis that nobody talks about. Hundreds of munitions plants across Germany, the United States, and the United Kingdom had been running at full capacity producing ammonium nitrate, the core ingredient in explosives. The war was over. The factories were not. Shutting them down meant writing off billions of dollars in infrastructure, thousands of jobs, and extraordinary political capital. The solution was elegant in its ruthlessness. Rebrand the product. Ammonium nitrate, the stuff that had been blowing up bridges and bunkers, was reformulated, diluted, and sold to farmers as a nitrogen fertilizer. The same factories, the same chemical process, a new customer, the global food supply. The fertilizer industry was not born from a desire to feed the world. It was born from a need to keep the machines running. By the 1960s, the Green Revolution, backed by the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the full weight of American foreign policy, had locked developing nations into a dependency cycle. Buy the seeds, buy the fertilizer, buy the pesticide, repeat every season. The market that emerged from this lock-in is today worth over $200 billion annually, growing at 3.5% per year according to Grandview Research's 2023 industry report. In Asia alone, smallholder farmers spend an estimated $40 billion every year on synthetic inputs, money extracted from some of the poorest agricultural communities on the planet. And in the middle of all this, a simple truth was quietly shelved. Healthy, electrically active soil does not need to be fed from a bag. It feeds itself. The research existed, the science was real. But there is no business model in telling a farmer to push 2 pieces of scrap metal into the ground and walk away. There is no patent on copper and zinc. There is no quarterly earnings report built on a junkyard find. So the knowledge was not destroyed. It was simply never amplified, never funded, never taught. And a generation of gardeners and farmers grew up believing that soil fertility came in a plastic bottle, because nobody who profited from that belief had any reason to tell them otherwise. That is how $200 billion of industry stays $200 billion of industry. To understand why two pieces of metal in the ground can wake up a dead soil, you have to go back to the moment electricity itself was born. Not in a laboratory, not in a university, but in an argument between two men who despised each other. Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta were both Italian, both brilliant, and by the 1790s both utterly convinced that the other was wrong. Galvani believed the electricity he observed in frog legs was biological in origin, that living tissue generated its own current, what he called animal electricity. Volta believed the electricity came entirely from the contact between two dissimilar metals, and that the frog was nothing more than a wet conductor caught in the middle. He called Galvani's theory naive. Galvani called Volta's reductionist. The argument consumed both of their lives. What neither man fully grasped was that they were both right. In 1800, Volta settled the argument, or thought he did, by building the world's first battery. He stacked alternating discs of copper and zinc, separated by cloth soaked in salt water, and produced a steady, continuous electrical current. No frogs, no biology, just metal, moisture, and chemistry. He called it the voltaic pile and sent a letter describing it to the Royal Society of London in March of that year. Within weeks, scientists across Europe were replicating the experiment. Within decades, the entire edifice of electrical engineering had been built on top of it. But here is what Volta's triumph accidentally buried. Galvani's instinct that biological systems are fundamentally electrical in nature was correct. It just took science another 150 years to prove it fully. By the mid-20th century, researchers had confirmed that every living cell maintains an electrochemical gradient across its membrane. Every bacterium, every fungal hypha, every root hair in your garden operates through the movement of charged ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, hydrogen, flowing across membranes in response to electrical potential differences. Life, at its most fundamental level, is electrochemical, and soil is not dirt. Soil is a living electrochemical system. In the early 1900s, a generation of European agronomists began to suspect that the electrical properties of soil were directly connected to its fertility. Russian soil scientist Vasily Dokuchayev, whose work in the 1880s had already established that soil was a living body rather than inert mineral matter, had laid the philosophical groundwork. By the 1920s and 1930s, researchers in Germany and the Soviet Union were conducting field experiments in what they called soil electroculture, the deliberate application of weak electrical fields to agricultural land to stimulate biological activity. The results were inconsistent, poorly documented by modern standards, and fiercely contested. But a persistent thread ran through the data. Soils exposed to weak electrical fields showed measurable increases in microbial respiration, faster decomposition of organic matter, and in several cases, improved crop yields of 15 to 30% compared to untreated control plots. Then the war came. Then the fertilizer industry came, and electroculture, the entire field of it, was quietly reclassified as fringe science and left to gather dust in agricultural libraries that nobody visited anymore. It did not disappear entirely. In Japan, during the 1970s and 1980s, a quiet revival took place inside several agricultural research institutions. Scientists at Kyushu University and the National Institute of Agro-Environmental Sciences began publishing studies on what they called electrostimulation of soil microorganisms, documenting in controlled conditions what the German and Soviet researchers had observed decades earlier in open fields. The mechanism, they found, was not mysterious at all. It was basic electrochemistry, and the most cost-effective way to deliver it required no machinery, no power source, and no ongoing expense. It required two different metals and wet soil between them. Galvani was right about one thing above all else. Electricity and life are not separate phenomena. In your garden at this moment, they are the same thing, and you are about to learn exactly how to use that. Now let's get precise, because this is where the science stops being a story and starts being a tool you can actually use. When you push a copper rod and a zinc rod into moist soil and leave them there, you have just built a battery, not metaphorically, literally. You have constructed a galvanic cell, The exact same electrochemical device that Volta demonstrated to the Royal Society in 1800, except instead of saltwater-soaked cloth between the metals, you are using soil. And soil, it turns out, is a remarkably good electrolyte. It contains dissolved mineral salts, organic acids produced by root exudates and decomposing matter, water molecules carrying charged ions in every direction. The moment your copper and zinc make contact with that environment, electrochemistry begins. Here is the mechanism in precise terms. Zinc is what chemists call the anode in this reaction, the metal that gives up electrons. Copper is the cathode, the metal that receives them. The difference in electrochemical potential between copper and zinc in a standard solution is approximately 1.1 volts. In soil, depending on moisture content, pH, and mineral composition, the actual voltage will typically range between 0.3 and 0.9 volts. That is not enough to power a light bulb. It is not enough to feel on your fingertips. But it is operating at exactly the same voltage range as the electrochemical gradients that govern microbial cell membranes. Typically 0.1 to 0.5 volts across a single bacterial membrane. This is not a coincidence. This is the mechanism. Research published by Trevors and Batt as early as 1983 in the journal Soil Biology and Biochemistry documented that weak exogenous electrical fields applied from outside the organism, measurably alter the metabolic rate of soil bacteria. The proposed mechanism involves electrophoresis of charged proteins and ions across bacterial membranes, essentially accelerating the transport of nutrients into the cell and waste products out of it. Think of it as opening a microscopic highway where previously there was only a dirt path. The bacteria do not change. The chemistry does not change. The speed of exchange changes. And in biology, speed of exchange is everything. Subsequent work from Japanese researchers at the National Agriculture and Food Research Organization, published between 1998 and 2006, went further. They demonstrated that specific bacterial populations, particularly nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the genus Azotobacter and decomposers in the genus Pseudomonas, showed statistically significant increases in colony-forming units per gram of soil when exposed to a weak DC electrical field over a period of 4 to 8 weeks. In one controlled greenhouse study, soils treated with a galvanic electrode pair showed a 23% increase in total microbial biomass carbon compared to untreated controls after 6 weeks. 23% more living biology in your soil from 2 pieces of metal. Now, and this matters because credibility requires honesty, the research is not without its limits. Most of the studies that show strong positive effects were conducted in controlled greenhouse conditions with optimized soil moisture and temperature. Field results in real gardens are more variable. Sandy soils with low mineral content conduct electricity poorly and show weaker effects. Very dry soils break the circuit entirely. The galvanic reaction requires liquid water as the electrolyte medium. Heavily compacted or chemically degraded soils may show slower response times. And the effect, while real, is not a replacement for adequate organic matter, proper pH, or basic soil structure. What the galvanic cell does is amplify biological activity that is already latent in the soil. It cannot create life where none exists. But here's what makes this significant beyond the laboratory numbers. The microorganisms that respond most strongly to electrostimulation are not random. They are disproportionately the species responsible for the 2 most critical functions in soil fertility: nitrogen fixation and organic matter decomposition. When these populations accelerate, the cascading effects move through the entire soil food web. More decomposition means more available phosphorus, more released micronutrients, more humic acids that improve water retention and aggregate structure. More nitrogen fixation means less dependency on external nitrogen inputs. The galvanic cell is not feeding your plants directly, it is feeding the invisible workforce that feeds your plants. And that workforce, once activated, operates 24 hours a day without any further intervention from you. Zinc and copper also contribute something beyond the electrical current. As the zinc anode slowly oxidizes over weeks and months, it releases zinc ions into the surrounding soil. Zinc is an essential micronutrient for plant growth. a cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions. And zinc deficiency is one of the most widespread micronutrient deficiencies in agricultural soils globally, affecting an estimated 50% of the world's cultivated land, according to the International Zinc Association's 2021 report. The slow, controlled release of zinc ions from the corroding anode functions as a precision micronutrient delivery system that no synthetic fertilizer replicates at this cost or at this release rate. Copper, at the cathode end, corrodes far more slowly and releases copper ions in smaller quantities, which at trace levels act as a natural fungicide and bactericide against pathogenic soil organisms without the broad-spectrum destruction caused by synthetic fungicide drenches that cost $20 to $60 per application and kill beneficial organisms alongside harmful ones. $2, two metals, and a set of biological mechanisms that the fertilizer industry charges you hundreds of dollars per year to partially replicate with synthetic chemistry. The soil already knows how to do this. It has been doing it for 3 billion years, everywhere that dissimilar minerals come into contact with groundwater. You are not introducing something foreign into your garden. You are recreating a condition that your soil's microbial community evolved alongside and has been missing ever since we started treating Earth like a substrate rather than a living system. This is the part where everything you just learned becomes something you can do tomorrow morning before your coffee gets cold. The materials list is almost insultingly simple. You need one piece of copper and one piece of zinc. That is the entirety of the bill of materials. Copper pipe offcuts are available at any plumbing supplier or hardware store. A 6-inch section of half-inch copper pipe costs between $0.50 and $100, and most plumbers will give you scrap pieces for free if you ask. Zinc is slightly less obvious but equally accessible. Galvanized roofing nails are zinc-coated steel and cost pennies. Zinc flashing, the thin metal sheeting used to seal roof edges, can be purchased at any hardware store for under $1 per foot, and a single foot gives you enough material for 4 to 6 electrode pairs. If you want the purest result, look for zinc anode rods at marine supply stores. These are sold to protect boat hulls from corrosion and are made of nearly pure zinc, available for $2 to $4 each and long enough to be cut into multiple electrodes. Total cost for one complete electrode pair, under $2. Total cost for equipping a 10 by 10 foot garden bed with 4 pairs, under $6. Total cost for maintaining the system indefinitely, 0, because rain does the rest. Now let's talk about placement, because this is where most people who have tried this casually get it wrong and why their results were inconsistent. The 2 electrodes must be inserted into the soil within the same moisture zone, but far enough apart to create a meaningful electrical field between them. The optimal spacing, based on the Japanese research protocols, is between 15 and 25 centimeters, roughly 6 to 10 inches. Closer than 15 centimeters and the electrical field is too concentrated in too small a volume of soil to stimulate a broad microbial population. Farther than 30 centimeters and the current dissipates too quickly through the soil matrix to reach effective intensity at the midpoint between the electrodes. Think of it as a zone of influence. You want the entire root zone of your plant sitting inside that zone, bathed in a field of gentle electrical potential. Depth matters equally. The electrodes should be pushed or driven into the soil to a depth of at least 10 centimeters, ideally 15 centimeters for most vegetable crops and perennial plants. This places the active electrode surface within the rhizosphere, the biologically dense zone immediately surrounding plant roots where microbial populations are already at their highest concentration and where the stimulation effect will have the most immediate impact on nutrient availability. Orientation is the detail that almost nobody discusses. The zinc electrode, your anode, your electron donor, should always be placed on the side of the plant that faces the prevailing weather or moisture source. In practical terms, if your garden receives rain from the west or you water from one end of the bed, place the zinc on that side. The reason is electrochemical. The galvanic reaction runs strongest in the direction of greatest ion mobility, which follows moisture gradients. Placing the zinc upslope of the copper ensures the ion flow moves through the root zone rather than around it. For a single plant, a tomato, a pepper, a fruit tree in a container, Use one electrode pair positioned symmetrically on opposite sides of the stem, 15 to 20 centimeters from the base. For a raised bed or garden row, space electrode pairs every 40 to 50 centimeters along the row, alternating which side carries the copper and which carries the zinc, so the electrical fields overlap and create a continuous stimulation corridor along the entire root zone. Now here is how you know it is working, without sending a soil sample to a laboratory. The first indicator appears within 1 to 2 weeks, and it is something every experienced gardener recognizes immediately. Earthworm activity. Earthworms navigate through soil partly by sensing electrochemical gradients. This is a documented behavior called galvanotaxis, observed in Lumbricus terrestris as early as 1942 by researcher H.S. Jennings. When the galvanic cell creates a stable low-voltage field, earthworms migrate toward the zone of higher electrochemical activity. Within 10 to 14 days of installing the electrodes, dig gently in the soil between and around them. If the system is working, you will find significantly more earthworm activity in that zone than in untreated areas of the same bed. Earthworms are your biological assay, free, always present, and more sensitive than most laboratory instruments at detecting soil biological activity. The second indicator takes 3 to 4 weeks and shows up in your plants directly. Leaves in the treated zone will show deeper green coloration, a visual proxy for chlorophyll density, which correlates directly with nitrogen availability. This is not a subtle effect. In gardens with previously poor or depleted soils, the color difference between treated and untreated plants in the same bed can be visible to the naked eye within a single growing month. The third indicator is soil smell. Healthy, biologically active soil has a specific distinctive odor, earthy, faintly sweet, produced by a compound called geosmin that is synthesized exclusively by actinobacteria, one of the microbial groups most responsive to electrostimulation. If your soil currently smells flat, chemical, or like nothing at all, and within 4 to 6 weeks of installing the electrodes, it begins to smell like rain on dry earth, your microbial community has woken up. That smell is not aesthetic, it is diagnostic. One final practical note that no commercial product will ever tell you. The system works best in soils that already have some organic matter present: compost, leaf litter, decomposing mulch. The galvanic cell accelerates biological processes, but it cannot create biological processes from nothing. If your soil is pure sand or heavily compacted clay with no organic content, add a 2-inch layer of compost to the surface before installing the electrodes. The compost provides the microbial seed bank. The electrodes provide the activation energy. Together, they create something that $40 bags of synthetic fertilizer simply cannot: a self-sustaining biological system that improves with every passing season rather than degrading without continuous external inputs. $2 to start it, $0 to maintain it, and a garden that gets better every year on its own terms. Let's put some numbers on the table, because the gap between what this costs and what the industry charges you for the same outcome is not just surprising. It is the kind of number that should make you genuinely angry. Walk into any garden center today and look at the shelf labeled soil amendments or biological activators. You will find products with names that sound like pharmaceutical compounds: mycorrhizal inoculants, humic acid concentrates, microbial biomass stimulators, electrochemically activated soil conditioners. The packaging is scientific. The language is precise. The price points are designed to signal credibility through cost. Because in the consumer mind, expensive means effective, and cheap means amateur. A standard 1-pound bag of granular mycorrhizal inoculant retails between $15 and $25 and treats approximately 10 square feet of garden bed. A bottle of liquid humic acid concentrate, marketed specifically as a microbial stimulant and soil activator, runs $18 to $35 for a quart, enough for 4 to 6 applications over a single growing season. Premium biochar-based microbial activator products from boutique organic gardening brands command $40 to $60 per kilogram. And at the top of the market, professional-grade biological soil treatment systems used in commercial horticulture run $200 to $500 per season for a single greenhouse bench. The global soil amendments market was valued at $4.2 billion in 2022, according to Markets and Markets Research, with projected growth to $6.8 billion by 2028. The biological soil treatment segment specifically, the products that claim to stimulate microbial activity, is the fastest growing category within that market, expanding at 11.4% annually, 11% every year, because people are buying the promise of a living soil, and the industry has successfully convinced them that promise comes in a bottle. Now let's compare mechanisms. The mycorrhizal inoculant in that $20 bag works by introducing fungal spores into the rhizosphere, spores that colonize root surfaces and extend the plant's effective nutrient uptake area. The mechanism depends entirely on the spores surviving soil conditions and finding an electrochemical environment hospitable enough to germinate and establish. In soils with low biological activity and poor electrochemical signaling, exactly the kind of degraded soil that most gardeners are trying to fix, mycorrhizal establishment rates drop significantly. Studies from the University of California, Davis, published in 2018, found that mycorrhizal inoculants showed highly variable results in field conditions, with establishment rates ranging from 12% to 78% depending on existing soil health. You are paying $20 for a product whose effectiveness depends on the very thing it claims to fix. The galvanic cell addresses the prerequisite. It does not introduce organisms. It activates the ones already present, improves the electrochemical environment that all soil organisms depend on, and creates conditions where expensive biological inputs, if you choose to use them alongside, will actually work as advertised. It is not a replacement for every product on that shelf. It is the foundation that makes all of them more effective, at a cost of under $2 that never needs to be repurchased. The liquid humic acid concentrate at $18 to $35 per bottle functions as an external source of humic substances, carbon-rich organic molecules that improve soil aggregate stability, cation exchange capacity, and microbial habitat quality. The galvanic cell, by accelerating the decomposition activity of existing soil microorganisms, drives the natural production of humic substances from whatever organic matter is already present in your soil. You are not buying the output. You are accelerating the factory that produces it endlessly for free. And then there is the category that exists almost exclusively because of how completely the industry has separated modern gardeners from basic soil science. The electrochemically activated water products. These are real products sold at real retailers, priced between $30 and $80 per liter. The marketing describes a process of passing electrical current through water to alter its oxidation reduction potential, making it more bioavailable and stimulating to plant root systems. The mechanism described is electrochemistry. The effect described is exactly what a galvanic cell produces in moist soil continuously, passively, and at zero operating cost once installed. $30 to $80 per liter. For bottled electrochemistry, when $2 of metal in the ground does the same thing indefinitely, the $200 billion fertilizer industry and the $6.8 billion soil amendment industry are not selling you fertility. They are selling you dependency. They are selling you the annual subscription model applied to the most fundamental human activity that exists, growing food. And the subscription only works if you never learn that the mechanism behind the most expensive products on that shelf is the same mechanism that Volta demonstrated with copper discs and saltwater cloth in the year 1800. You have been paying a 200-year markup on knowledge that belongs to everyone. Here is the moment in every video like this where the host says, subscribe and hit the bell icon, and you reach for your phone to do something else. This is not that moment. What I am about to ask you to do is something different, and the reason it matters goes beyond this channel, beyond this video, and beyond your garden. Think about what you now know that you did not know 30 minutes ago. You know that the fertilizer industry was not born from a desire to feed the world. It was born from a need to repurpose weapons factories. You know that the science of soil electricity was real, documented, and reproducible, and that it did not disappear because it was disproven. It disappeared because there was no profit model attached to it. You know that the products currently occupying 4 full shelves at your garden center are selling you at markups of several thousand %. The partial and inefficient chemical approximation of something $2 of scrap metal does better, continuously and for free. And you know something more important than all of that. You know that the story you were told about your garden, that it is fragile, that it needs constant external inputs, that fertility is something you purchase rather than something you cultivate, was not an accident. It was a curriculum, designed, funded, and distributed by an industry with $200 billion reasons per year to make sure you'd never stop believing it. Here is your identity shift. You are not a gardener who buys products. You have never been that. You are a person who understands biological systems well enough to work with them instead of against them. And the only thing standing between you and a completely self-sustaining garden was the information that this video just gave you, free in under 30 minutes. That is not a small thing. That is the entire game. When you share this video, you are not helping a YouTube channel hit an algorithm target. You are putting this information in front of one more person who is currently spending $40 a season on synthetic inputs they do not need, whose soil is getting worse every year instead of better, and who has never been told that the solution costs less than a cup of coffee and lasts indefinitely. Every share is an act of information redistribution. Every comment where you document your results, your earthworm counts, your leaf color, your soil smell, is a data point that no industry-funded research program has any interest in collecting. You are the study, your garden is the laboratory, and the results you generate are the kind of evidence that survives long after marketing budgets run out. Go to your hardware store this week, spend $2, push 2 pieces of metal into the ground next to the plant you care most about. Then come back in 4 weeks and tell us what you found. Not because we need the engagement, because the person who reads your comment 6 months from now in a country we will never visit, with a soil problem we will never personally encounter, needs to know that it worked for someone real in a real garden with $2 and 30 minutes of curiosity. That is how suppressed knowledge survives. Not through institutions, not through funding, through people who tried it and told someone else. One last thing before you go. What we covered today, the galvanic cell, the microbial activation, the 150 years of buried electroculture research, is only one layer of what has been hidden inside the science of soil electricity. There is a second mechanism, older than Galvani, older than Volta, that operates not between metals but between the atmosphere and the earth itself, a natural electrical gradient that ancient agricultural civilizations appear to have understood and deliberately engineered into their farming systems in ways that modern soil science is only now beginning to investigate seriously. That is the next video. And if what you learned today made you question one thing you thought you knew about your garden, what is coming next will make you question the entire history of agriculture.